What is going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce. So, originally, when I was trying to record this, I said it as episode 3. I made a miscount. I did say on the community and that this was episode 2 of my RetroRev um, section. So, I apologize. This is indeed episode 2 of my RetroRev series. And I am going to be going over a film that some people likely don't know. An animated film called Balto back in 1995. Before I go on into doing a quick delve into the film, I do want to point out that I did used to own the film back on VHS. And what I recall back in the day is that I had originally gotten this as an Easter basket as a kid, roughly after Easter. And I also had like a small book that came along with it. For those of us that were in the 90s who are fans of R.L. Stein and Goosebumps, that was I actually got one of the books that was part of the Easter basket as a kid. You ever come across those pre-made Easter baskets that you sometimes see at the grocery stores? They're sometimes scattered during, the month of when Easter's about to approach and spring and all that. That's basically what it kind of was. And I was fortunate enough to have gotten that tape back then as a kid. Anyway, before I go on any further, I do want to remind people hit that like and subscribe button. And I may not be posting as much compared to others, but this is definitely one that I just felt like doing because in a matter of days, Christmas is going to be upon us, and I'll be eventually doing another film review. Oops, I can't believe I put that. Sorry. I don't know why I said 3. That's my mistake. Let me fix that real quick. Tiny little snafu. There we go. I am so sorry, guys. It's roughly it's almost lunchtime already, and I got a bunch of other things to do, so I'm gonna try to make this a little bit quick. So yeah, I just want to give a quick perspective here in terms of who was in the film. So give me a moment. So yeah, we have Simon Wells who directed the film. We have Miriam Margolyes who actually played the grandmother in this film, and I'll get to a specific point later on. We also have Lola Bates Campbell who played the granddaughter. That's at the opening of the film. We have Kevin Bacon who voiced Balto. Also, excuse me, we have the late Bob Hoskins, who played Boris the Goose. This guy, I only recognized the guy's voice. I didn't recognize him as an actor until I looked at another film, which I'll eventually be reviewing sometime soon, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I only got to watch that film once. And I will eventually be covering that at a separate video. But moving on, we also got Bridget Fonda, who played Jenna, who was the love interest of Balto. The legendary Jim Cummings, who played Steel the Sled Dog. This guy, if you were paying attention to one of my other reviews, this guy has done a lot of characters. He played Winnie the Pooh, he played Tigger, he was Darkwing Duck, and this guy has done many multiple voices that has pretty much defined the childhood of us 90s kids. And I am not lying here. As a 90s kid myself, there was a lot of, cartoons we used to watch back in the day before we even had internet. And I'm just saying this as a fact. For those of you guys that were in the 80s and 90s, you know what I'm talking about. And there's some shows you might have watched, others you might have not. But anyway, this guy, he did great. We also have Phil Collins. This guy has done a lot of great music. This is his only acting role in an animated film. The only other artist that I could think of that did a voiceover film was Billy Joel when he was in Oliver and Company. And I am likely to cover that film at some point in time. But those are the only two that I could think of in terms of singing that also did a little bit of acting. Now, there might be others. If you guys know of any others who have done both singing and acting, well, who was a singer and also did a little bit of voice acting, do let me know in the comments below. And like I said, this film came out back in 1995. This was based on the Salmon Run. I mean, sorry, I don't know why I said Salmon. Serum Run. I apologize, guys. I mean, I kind of like was up late last night, so my brain's kind of like going everywhere. But anyway, this was regarding the 1925 Serum Run from Nenana to Nome. And before I go any further about the film, I will do a quick speed run on this. This film tried to historically give a general understanding of what was going on during that time in Alaska. And there was an outbreak of diphtheria. For those of you who have watched a film called Togo, likely know that this is actually a fact. Balto was only chosen because of the marketability of the name, and they think Togo was not as, marketable per se, at least according to the news media. Now, that being said, this is a kids' film. It tried to at least give kids an understanding in terms of what's going on during that time. And as I mentioned earlier, with regards uh, to Miriam Margolyes, we get to the opening part of the film. She's leading her granddaughter around Central Park in New York City, and she's trying to find a memorial. And the granddaughter's confused. It's like, so what is a memorial? The grandmother points out that, it's a reminder of a wonderful story of an event that took place a long time ago. And she points out to the granddaughter that it happened in Nome, Alaska. And the thing was, before she tells the story, she actually holds the musher's hat, which is really like it's really small, and it's roughly around like this diameter, like how I'm doing it with my hands here. And the reason why she's holding it is that I'll get to that part later. She was actually I'll get to the reveal of who the grandmother was later. She was the original owner of that hat, and she passed it along to her granddaughter. So eventually, the grandmother goes into narration about what went on, that the fastest way of trekking across Alaska back in the day was through sled dogs. And when it transitions into animation, we then get Steele and his team are participating in a sled dog race. And he's going against another team. Balto wants to watch the race, and obviously he drives his friend Boris the goose bonkers with this. So he's trying to sneak around, and Boris is saying, Every time there's a race, you run around like you're in it. Well, maybe one day I will be. Heel, boy! Boris Gustenov is no spring chicken. Why? I apologize, guys. I'm just trying to do my best on like an impression, but Bob Hoskins, he was awesome as a comedian, and basically it gets to a point where um we as the race is going on, we cut to a point where there's a young girl named Rosie, and she's gifted by her parents a sled. The mother bought her a musher's hat, which is what we see previously in the prologue, and Jenna obviously is her dog. So anyway, we get to the point where um, as Steele and his team rounds the corner, Jenna actually catches the attention of Balto, and you can see from Balto's expression he is smitten or enamored with her. Like he's really into her. And Rosie sees Steele coming around the corner and is about to try to cheer him on when a sudden gust of wind blows off her hat right in the middle of the track. And then Balto sees this as an opportunity to try and, impress her. Boris manages to find his way through the crowd. And then as Balto's running right, side by side with Steele, the human onlookers obviously dislike the dog, and one of the onlookers points out, "Hey, it's that stray dog. He's going to ruin the race." And Steele, seeing Balto, knowing who he is and what he is, he basically insults Balto, saying, "Out of my way, Lobo." And Balto manages to get the hat, gets out of the way, allowing Steele and his team to cross the finish line. Boris is annoyed, and he's like, "When will you learn to stay on the sidelines?" And he gets hit by snow as the team crosses over. Rosie, of course, berates Balto, and as he gives her hat back, she's like, "Balto, that is what a silly little thing to do, just to show off to a pretty girl." And Rosie can obviously tell that, he likes her, but her father, brings her back, and he points out that he was also part wolf. And there's a few other characters that it has been voiced by the same person. And the person, give me a second, it was by Sandra Dickinson. She voices Sylvie as well as Dixie, so she did double time on this character on this. And Sylvie actually is the one who's pointing out to Jenna, is like, say something about Dixie's collar before she gets whiplash. I just love the way how she delivers that line. And despite Dixie trying to get Steele's attention, he's obviously not interested. And Jenna obviously does the same thing to Steele, stating that, she's like not interested in whatever Steele has to offer. But there's a point in like after the film, I mean, after the film, sorry, after the race, where a photographer who takes a picture of the musher and Steele, and the owner's asking, "I don't know, do you think Steele's losing his edge?" And the photographer bluntly replies, "Yeah, it seems like any dog can outrun him." So that, of course, wounds Steele's pride. And he takes it out on Balto. And when Balto kind of like goes back to his, I guess I could say, personal home, which is one of those abandoned wood ships, Balto obviously feels ashamed because he thinks that, him being half breed is actually a weakness. Boris tries to cheer him up, is not unable to do so. There's an interesting point where Boris brings up not the dog, not the wolf. All he knows is what he is not. If only he could see what he is. And the thing is that Balto is kind of like feeling a little bit depressed, but the funny exchange that happens a little later then introduces us to Muck and Luck, two polar bears. But prior to that, Balto sees a flock of geese going south, and he says, "Homesick, Boris? Do you ever think of going back? Don't fret, Fido. I'm sticking here until I'm certain you can stand on all 4 feet. You're taking care of me. Don't thank me." And so Balto's kind of sniffing the air, and he's like, smells like herring. He's like, oh, seems like the salmon are going south too. Must be Muck and Luck. And of course, when Boris hears Uncle Boris, Balto is like, how sweet, Uncle Boris. No hugging, no leaking. And you see him holding the bucket as a shield, and then he's holding the mop as a sword. And he spots the smaller one, which is Muck, and he's thinking, he's like, "Oh, great, the other one's not around." But then he backs up, and then Luck is right behind, just to annoy him. And Balto obviously knows that those two look up to him as a kind of like, I guess I could say, surrogate parent, if you will. But unfortunately, later on, when diphtheria hits, Rosie also gets affected and is among the children. The clinic gets overrun, and obviously the doctor is out of antitoxin. So the only way to try and get it is through a dog race. So originally, the newsman tries to see like if they could try doing it through sea or air, but a storm is rolling in, which is making it impossible for delivery by sea or air, which leaves the only option left by rail line. And it is through the authorization by the governor of in Juneau, Alaska, which is actually the capital. The governor authorizes the transport of antitoxin to be transported. And as I mentioned a while ago, the only way to sell that is through a race. Now, I should have mentioned a while ago that Nikki, Kaltag, and Star are Steele's lackeys. And of course, they were bullying Balto earlier. So Balto tries to sneak into the race. And I don't remember which character said it, but the line goes, "Balto, what are you, nuts? If Steele catches, he's going to turn you into kibble." And then another one of the dogs points out, "Why not let the half dog run? It's going to be fun making him eat our snow." And so the race starts, and Balto manages to maneuver around them. One of Steele's lackeys obviously kicks him off the track, and he's on the ice. Boris is a little bit nervous, but manages to cheer him on. And the thing is that Balto does win, but Steele exposes his, wolf like side. And then the musher's like, yeah, we can't trust this one. He might turn on me. And one the photographer's looking is like, did you see those teeth? And despite um, Balto pointing out to Steele, that he did win, Steele's arrogance pretty much is going to be his downfall. And Jenna is one of the few that points it out that, as long as the medicine comes through, stop being such a glory hound. Is basically what Jenna is telling to Steele because he's such a hardhead, sorry. And the thing is that when Balto sees Rosie's condition worsening, he realizes that he's the only one who might be able to try to figure it out. And Boris is basically trying to tell Balto, don't go through this. He's like, Balto, please, don't go crazy on me now. Ugh, this is foolishness. You're going to freeze like a dog. Ooh, no offense. Whoa! And you see Boris fall through a pipe, and he's kind of like um, pointing out to Balto like why this is a bad idea. You will be frozen stiff by morning. When you are a big stiff frozen statue named Balto, don't come running to me. And then you see him get hit by Luck and Muck right behind him. And Luck is like, he says, where is he going? He's going to freezing coldness to find a dog he doesn't like to bring medicine back to a town that doesn't like him. Oh no! I am beginning to understand the bear. uh, I tried, but that part just cracks me up every time. It does not get old. And the thing is that with this one, um, it's basically pointing out to Boris as Balto brings him over that he keeps complaining. He's like, no brains at all. Might as well be talking to humans. Now, before I go a little further on this, I'm kind of trying to speed through this because it's a pretty short film. There's a minor gripe that I have with the captions, and I have watched this film a lot on VHS, approximately maybe like 10, 15, 20 times. And yet, what I noticed when I was looking at the captions is that they replaced it as talking with laces. So obviously, when they were working on this one, they got some parts right, but when they were listening and then transcribing it, I think it just didn't come out right according to the person that was working on the captions. Now, I don't know how it is on the DVD version of it with subtitles. They might have had it right, they might not have had it right, but basically Boris sees what's going on and he's like, "So, let's go get the medicine." Wait a minute. Now you're coming? Spending days in bitter cold, facing wild animals, risking death from exposure. It's like holiday in old country. So basically, what Balto is doing is that as they're going to try to find Steel and the others, Steel obviously is too arrogant to realize that he doesn't know where he's going, even though some of his members of his team is stating that, you know, they need to really try to, you know, figure out where they're going. But Steel being hard headed, unfortunately leads them astray. They unfortunately go off a small, like, I don't know if I would say ledge, but they run into some really hard ice. And what it looks like to me when I was rewatching it recently is that the ice was more of kind of like, I guess I could say, a waterfall, which is the reason why it's kind of like this. It's slanted. So they're sliding off down, and then you see the broken trees. It pretty much, bangs up the musher. Steel gets knocked out. I mean, gets thrown off. The crate's still good, and then the all the other dogs kind of get scattered all over. One of them points out that the musher is injured pretty bad, and Steel is pretty much kind of like clueless in terms of what he needs to do. So Balto uses a method of trying to mark the trail with his marks, and as Boris, Muck, and Luck are tagging along, they unfortunately get stalked by a grizzly bear, and Balto tries his attempt to stop it, but he gets weighed down by the huge, gigantic paw of the grizzly bear. Just as Balto's about to get done for, Jenna comes in, but even though she manages to buy him some time, Balto has to lead the grizzly away from them. And so eventually that leads to a huge lake that has already been frozen over. The grizzly pursues him, but eventually, because of the weight, he sinks. And then Balto tries to get out of the way, but there's a small section of the lake that breaks off and it flips, causing him to be under the water. At this point, Muck and Luck manages to get him out. Jenna and Boris are overjoyed, but there's a funny part in this one where Balto says to them, "You two should try swimming. You'd be pretty good at it." And then Luck is kind of like going with his whimpering and all that. And I mean, Muck is going on with his whimpering and all that. And Luck is kind of like, "Well, yes, of course, we were in the water. We got in the water. We got wet. We got moving." And then Muck, we were swimming. And then Balto's laughing his head off at the revelation because he was right. And earlier, when Balto was in the water, Boris was like, "They cannot swim." And Jenna's like, "What? Polar bears who can't swim?" But anyway, I'm kind of going back and forth here. Jenna obviously got injured during the fight with the grizzly. So it's up to Boris to lead Buck and Luck to have her bring Jenna back to town. And Jenna offers her bandana to Balto to try to keep him warm. And the thing is that Balto has to take a certain path that is different. But prior to leaving, Boris gives Balto an important piece of advice. "Let me tell you something, Balto. A dog cannot make this journey alone, but maybe a wolf can." And that quote is definitely one that is one of my favorite quotes from the film. And Balto does eventually manage to find Steel, but as he's trying to, offer his assistance, Steel is being a jerk, and basically the two kind of have a bit of a quarrel. And Balto's pointing out, "Steel, I'm not leaving without that medicine." And so Steel headbutts him, and he's going, "Who do you think you are?" And Balto retorts back to him with unobvious proof that he knows what he's talking about. "Since when do you need a pedigree to help someone?" And despite Balto's attempts at trying to persuade Steel, obviously Steel, grabs him by the neck and just throws him right towards a rock nearby. And that damage was like pretty bad, but Balto obviously is being stubborn as he is. And when Steel grabs the bandana, trying to drag Balto down with him, he fails and he falls. But eventually, Steel's former team eventually accepts Balto as their leader, and they manage to not just secure the antitoxin and the musher inside, but by the time Steel gets back, Steel decides to try to sabotage Balto by doing his own marks after he gave a demonstration of how he lead them back. And obviously, Steel manages to get back to town. And the thing is, even though he explains to the others like what went on, Jenna is able to see right through his lies after he shows the bandana and he kind of spins the story of what happened between him and Balto. But anyway, Balto tries to lead them, but when he sees the other marks, um, unfortunately, he kind of gets um, sidetracked, if you will, because he of the various marks trying to figure out where they need to go. And unfortunately, they lead towards a ledge, and they do manage to try and um, prevent the crate from falling off. But the ropes start to break. Balto tries to save it, barely, but what he was standing on was actually just a huge patch of snow that looked like a ledge. So gravity obviously takes over, and he falls, you know, over the edge. But thankfully, when he wakes up, um, he sees that the crate is still good, and then he sees um, a white wolf, a snow wolf, if you will, approach him, and it howls. And the wolf seems to know that he is also part wolf. And when he looks up at where he fell, then the words of Boris come into his head, which I mentioned earlier. So eventually, Balto embraces his wolf side and then howls for the first time. And then, the white wolf joins him in howling. And then the other dogs are kind of like, well, one of Steele's um, former members says, "Oh, great, things aren't bad enough. Now we've got wolves." And when they see Balto dragging the crate, and then they see his paw print that he's actually part wolf, they actually start cheering him on. So eventually, they manage to get across a bridge, and they almost lose it, but manage to persevere. And as they're going through a valley, unfortunately, one of the dogs causes a sneeze, which triggers an avalanche, which then causes them to have to take shelter inside a cave, which is full of um, icicle stalactites, I think. But as they're trying to get out, unfortunately, they lose only one vial as the crate breaks. Balto manages to save it, and eventually they manage to find their way home. And Balto notices a signal that he showed Jenna earlier with regards to trying to replicate the aurora borealis or northern lights. And when the other dogs find out that Balto was the one that brought the medicine back and not Steele, obviously Steele is disappointed, and the dogs leave Steele behind. And of course, that's when um, the story eventually ends, and the granddaughter tells her grandmother Blaze that Blaze, her dog, found the memorial that the grandmother was looking for. And so, as they're reading the memorial inscription to Balto, we see that the grandmother mentions a line that was in near the end of the story when Balto finally gets to see Rosie, and Rosie points out, "Thank you, Balto. I would have been lost without you." Well, towards the end of the film, the grandmother repeats the exact same line. That tells the viewer that Rosie is actually her. And with that part being said, that comes to the end of this quick review of, of my Retro Rev episode of Balto. Now, again, this was a kids show. It was rated G. They kept it very minimal in terms of what the story was about trying to keep it kid friendly, make it simple enough. Arguably, objectively, I would say the film did that. Now, while the animation style might be dated at first, I doubt I can say the same for the last two. However, with the direct to video sequels, I didn't actually watch it even though it came out. I just watched it when it aired on TV years later. The only one that I watched was the second one called Wolf Quest. The actors in that one was different compared to the first film. Now, objectively, I will say that the story is simple, the characters are great, the music was good, and it was pretty straightforward. So, overall, I would say story at least 7 out of 10, characters an 8 out of 10. And then overall, at best, I would, if I had to be subjective about it, which is more on giving my bias and all, characters at least 9, story between a 6 and a 7. But then again, it is a kids' film. Animation, I should have mentioned that about that earlier. Objectively, it's a 10 out of 10. Subjectively, 9 out of 10. And overall, this film, at best, despite it being a 90s film, I would likely give this an 8 out of 10 at best. So, with that part being said, this has been Skyhound for Geek, or also known as Geek Detective Pierce. Thank you for watching episode 2. For episode 3, I will mention that I am going to be going over a film that I covered with Orange Hat Reviews once, but I am going to speed through this one since originally I had done it on a laptop. But again, I am going to be going over the film because, as a matter of fact, I'm actually going to be interviewing somebody who was a part of the film, a stuntman, if you will. As for what I'm going over, let me point it out to you guys right now. One moment. Now you know. I know it says episode 5. I need to make some changes on it. This is actually going to be episode 3. Just a slight little snafu. I mean, sorry, not episode 5. Sorry, this is episode. This is going to be episode 4. I apologize, guys. Episode 3 is going to be my Christmas special, and for that, I will be going over Home Alone. And basically, there's going to be very few films I'll be trying to review, but some I'll be going over live, others I won't. Now, if you guys want to take a look at some other reviews, I know there have been others YouTubers that I followed that have also reviewed Home Alone. I will eventually put the link in the description below. But with that being said, this has been Geek Detective Pierce, also known as Skyhound. Hope you guys have a great happy holidays. Merry Christmas. And as always, stay safe, stay humble, and stay grateful. Peace.